Okay, so lesson 9 in unit 2 is a really important lesson for actual real life math because percents show up all over in real life applications of math, especially when we're talking about money and interest and things like that. So we are going to solve percent problems using proportions, which we learned in the last lesson, and we're going to solve percent problems using this percent equation. So basically, the percentage proportion, is when we have a percent, let's say something like 25%. %25 as a ratio is 25 over 100. We can write that as a ratio, okay? And then any fraction that satisfies 25 over 100 is represented by a over b. So an example of that would be like a is 1, b is 4. 1 over 4 is the same as 25 over 100. So we can use percentages or percents to solve for different parts. So if we know something is 25% of something else, we can set up some sort of percentage proportion. So just always remember, a percent is always out of 100. So when we go to that percent equation next, that is talking about, I give you an example of A is, let's just say P% of B. So if A is P% of B, that would mean A is equal to that percent P times B. And that percent will usually be represented by a decimal. So if I'm trying to find 50% of 5, I would do 5 times 0.5. So the percentage equation helps us find out, are we multiplying by a percent or dividing by a percent? We'll talk about that a little bit later. And the final thing here is an important one. We'll get to compound interest later. That's the more common interest equation. But simple interest is this I equals P times R times T. So in this equation, in this simple interest equation, I is the interest you earn. P is not percent. P is the principal, the starting value of your account. R is the percent rate as a decimal. Okay? So if you have a 5% interest rate, the R would be 0.05. And then finally, T. T is the time. And the important part there is T is the time in years. The time in years. So when we talk about interest, simple interest right now, we're talking about it in terms of years. So we're going to use that percent proportion to ask questions. What percent of 90 is 54? So a common thing to use here, the first thing, that proportion is going to be an equation. And whenever we deal with percents, one of our ratios is always going to be over 100 because percents are always out of 100. So basically you have a fraction set equal to that percent ratio, okay? So if we're trying to figure out what percent of 90 is 54, well, we're trying to find what percent. So we're looking for the percent P out of 100 for 54 out of 90. So 54 would go on the top, 90 would go on the bottom. Now this is a common thing to use. It doesn't always work, but it's a good thing to follow sometimes. So I'm going to show you this. When we write this fraction on the left-hand side, it's usually is over of. We think of it that way. So is 54, of is 90, so 54 out of 90. So to solve this, cross multiply. 90 times P is 90P. 54 times 100 is 5,400. and then I just solve that by dividing both sides by 90. So that should be, the percent is 60%. So we're using proportions to do that. You may have other methods you use, and that is fine, good. But I want to show you how to use proportions to solve these percent problems. Okay? So, I'm still going to use proportions. I want to give you a consistent way to solve these, okay? And the proportions, I think, is, for me, the easiest way. So it asks, what percent of 40 is 2.5? So right now might be a good chance for you to just maybe pause me, shut me up for a second, and set up this. Try and set up this, and I'll explain. But I'm going to keep going with my explanation to help you kind of set this up. So we're asking for what percent. So what percent, which is always out of 100, of 40 is 2.5? So if we're following that is over of, is 2.5 of 40. So 2.5 over 40. You got to read these carefully, though, to know what we're taking out of something. Okay? So I do 40 times p is 40p. 2.5 times 100 is 250. Okay? Then I'm going to divide both sides by 40. So 250 divided by 40 is 6.25. So P, 6.25%. And that should kind of make sense. 2.5 out of 40 is around 6.25%. It's a small percentage of that total, okay? So this asks, it talks about using different methods. I just want to still use the proportions, all right? If you have a different way that works for you, let me know, all right? But this is the way I'm going to teach it, because proportions are an important thing that we're going to use throughout Algebra 1, throughout geometry, throughout Algebra 2. So it's a recurring thing. So I'm going to finish out this example, and then I'm going to have you guys move on to the next step in the lesson. So it says, what percent of 84 is 63? It says use the percent equation. Let's just use our proportion to solve, okay? So don't worry about it having you do it in different methods. I'm just going to have you pick the method that works best. In this case, I'm giving you one method, so the comparing the answers to isn't going to be a factor here. So this is a good chance for you to pause, try this one completely on your own, and then resume the video when you are ready to move on. So for this problem, I was asking what percent, P, out of 100, so that's one side of that proportion that's always kind of ready for us, the out of 100 part, and it says of 63, or of 84 is 63. So 63 will go on the top, 84 will go on the bottom, and then I just do my cross multiplication to solve. 84p equals 6300, divide by 84, p is 75%, so 3/4. So this is finding a percent, so it's important to know how to read these. So I'm going to have you do a mini kind of practice on this in the next step, a little activity for you to do, and then you're going to move on to finish off the rest of the notes.